Hello and welcome. I am going to be showing you one of my favorite tools, the plastic welder. Now this particular plastic welder is bought at Harbor Freight for roughly 40 bucks. They're very cheap. You can use another soldering iron style one where it is pretty much just an iron and basically does the same thing. However, this is more versatile, and this you can, in my opinion, get a lot more done. It is ran off of two things. This particular one, unlike the other models, is driven by an air compressor. They do sell units that have an air compressor built in, but this one you can use if you already have your own air compressor. Very low requirements. It only runs off of 5 psi tool pressure, so it shouldn't be a problem, and then just a regular power plug. So essentially what this tool is a blow dryer, more or less. You have an adjustable heat setting to control how hot you want it to be, and it blows hot air on the plastic you're working with. Now, what I like to use this for is when I'm working on cars and many things involved with cars, like mostly making or fixing parts. For example, this is a cap that goes on the back of my headlight to keep moisture out. However, for an aftermarket system, I drilled a hole through it in order to get wiring through it. Now I'm going back to stock, and I can't have that hole there. What we're doing, or what I did, is I cut out a piece of plastic, welded it back together, so there is no more hole and water can't travel in. So things like that. So, that being said, let me show you some stuff. Now this is where it gets seemingly more complicated. This is on the package of the welding rods that you use, which can be bought at Harbor Freight. You can find them online and probably many other stores. Just look around and I'm sure they're available. They're usually with welding stuff. As you can see, there's different types of rods for different types of plastic. The green rod is PP, gray rod is PVC, sorry. White rod is ABS. Now, it does define what these are. So, PVC, polyvinyl chloride, plastic pipe, irrigation lines. I think most people know what PVC is. Polypropylene, telephones, keyboards, household hard plastics. Honestly, I've found that that's probably one of the more common ones is the PP, and it's everywhere. So if you ever practice, that's what I suggest you use. And that's what I'll be using in this video. And then ABS, blow molded products, high resistant to chemicals. I have worked very little with this, but I am sure there's plenty. So anyway, here's the 3 different welding rods, and we're going to be using the PP. Now, I'm sure most of you are wondering, how the heck are you supposed to tell what type of plastic it is? A lot of the time, it is actually labeled. As you can see, this is HDPE. Even if we look on this big lid, we can go by the recycling information, and right there it is PP. A lot of you are wondering, well, surely there's more than 3 types of plastic in the world, and yes, you're absolutely right, there are tons more. And of course not everything is going to be made out of those particular types of plastic. The truth is, you don't necessarily need them. However, they are very useful, but I will show you how to get away without using them. One thing I should mention is if you are lacking in material, like I said, PP is a great place to start. Now, again, you can find that usually where the recycling sign is. Oh, I actually cut it out, but it would have been right here. It says PP. Anyway, you can go to Walmart or Target or wherever you want to go, and you can get yourself a bin like this, or a bin lid, and it's just a nice big flat sheet of material that you can cut pieces out of and practice on. Now, these are pretty cheap, or if this is something that you want to invest in, then yeah, this is a good idea. As you can see, this is where I cut out these from. Of course, there's all kinds of spare plastic laying around. I highly suggest finding some. And now we're going to get on to the procedure side of things, which is the fun part. So, but before we get started, of course, safety first. I suggest safety glasses and gloves, preferably something thick. I would not use anything thin like vinyl or plastic gloves or rubber gloves. I would suggest something leather or a thicker material like this, or something just generally heat resistant and something that you can stay dexterous in. But if we look here, of course this is your tool pressure gauge. Now it is suggested from 5 to 10 psi. So if you have something like 100 psi, you are going to absolutely blow your workpiece off of the bench. So again, low pressure. Okay, now the next step is prep. Prep is quite important for almost anything you do, especially involving welding. Now, there's several ways you can do this, depending on your material type. Now, you can use some kind of blade to scrape it and basically rough it up or score it. You can use sandpaper to do the same. And we get this. You're going to want your mating surface very clean, because the key to any good weld is a clean surface, and it always helps. So, I use the Dremel for this. If you have access to a Dremel, these two things go hand in hand, and you have a major leg up. I suggest doing crisscross. As with any scoring methods, now we have kind of in both ways. So always ensure that your mating surfaces are clean, they don't have any grease. And being roughed up just makes a really nice way to bond. Okay, now while I show you these actual welding steps, I'm going to go ahead and use the computer to record because the air compressor is too loud to get any audio. Now, the most dangerous thing about this is this piece right here. It is very hot. If you touch it, you can burn yourself quite easily, and the air itself can burn you if you leave it on your skin too long, although it won't burn you instantly. However, it is very hot air, and it can burn you. Now, when you are holding smaller objects, it is advised to use vice grips or pliers to keep the heat away from your hands. So, that being said, you will also need your rod. Make sure you're at about 5 psi on your tool pressure, and we can begin. So I'm going to start by warming up this plastic, and as you can see, it's starting to look melted. Now be very careful when you're doing this, because you don't want to do too much, because you can actually melt through the plastic or warp the plastic. Now, once you get it nice and hot, and you are ready to go ahead and press your plastic piece into the other piece and work the nozzle back and forth in kind of a swinging motion in order to melt the plastics together, and you'll find that the air tends to push the plastics into each other. And so if you don't have the right welding rod material and you're kind of just winging it, that's kind of where it ends. And if you are using a welding rod, go ahead and grab it, and then you will begin by heating the rod. You just hold the nozzle in front of the rod and heat it up. And you will be able to tell when it gets nice and hot. Basically, you're trying to melt it. It will sort of change colors, become smoother in appearance, and at some point, as you can see, the rod will sort of bend. At that point, it is pliable. And then you want to heat the mating surface until it is appropriate and seems melty enough, and reheat the rod, and then apply pressure of the rod onto the mating surface while you kind of use a pendulum motion to swing back and forth, melting the rod as you press down onto the surface. As you heat it up, you want to be aware of everything else you are heating up, i.e. the two pieces that you are actually putting together. You can damage what you're working with if it is too hot. So always be aware of everything, not just the welding rod. And continue on, and then at the end you can heat the end and twist it, and it should break free. Now this is an example or a little time lapse of exactly what happens when you leave heat on a certain area for a long time. As you can see, first it changes color and smoothness, and then it starts to ripple, which is kind of what you want in some cases. And it will just keep rippling and getting hotter and hotter and push the plastic away, forming a crater, and eventually it'll break through. Now you can use things like computer duster to help manage the heat a little bit. So for example, you go in and heat up this area, and then you come in with the computer duster to cool it off. Now, as you can see from these examples, the plastic can become warped. You can put holes through it. It won't sit flat. You can mess up the texture. So managing that is important. Next up, cleaning up your work. Now, obviously you can do that by making better welds, but sometimes you just need to do it. I suggest a Dremel. You can use any tool or file, anything that you see fit. Remember, always use safety goggles and gloves when you're using a Dremel. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to this piece that I had already been working on, which is my cap. Once you kind of get everything uniform and even, then you can just take high grit sandpaper and work it until you're kind of at where you want to be as far as smoothness. And then go ahead and move to a finer grit if you choose to do that. And here's what one looks like after it's been painted, and yeah. In conclusion, the plastic welder is a very convenient and versatile tool, which at the very least can be very fun to use, and it is only limited by your own imagination. So, with that being said, thank you very much for watching, and now maybe you'll be convinced to buy a plastic welder and go out and have your own fun.